You're joking. Not another one?
Yes, I'm afraid so.
Oh, for God's sake, I can't stand this. Why does she need to do it?
He says this will produce clarity, it gets things out in the open, sorts things out.
I thought she said that initially when she took over. No, I disagree with this entirely. I'm sorry.
Last season, Hull City finished 7th in the Championship, 1 place and 3 points off the playoff places. It was a remarkable rise in Liam Rosenior's first full season managing the club. The previous season, Hull finished 15th, and when Rosenior was first appointed, the Tigers were 21st in the Championship table, just 1 point and 1 place above the relegation zone, with the worst goal difference and the most goals conceded in the division. In 18 months, Rosenior took Hull from the cusp of relegation to the cusp of the playoffs. It was an achievement which saw Rosenior nominated for the Championship Manager of the Season award last season, alongside Kieran McKenna and Daniel Farker, as a talented and well-spoken young English manager with a burgeoning reputation within the game. Naturally then, just 3 days after the season ended, Hull City sacked him. They what, sorry? They sacked him, with Turkish owner Acil Ilıcalı citing Rosenior's style of play not being attacking or entertaining enough, selection decisions, and a failure to win promotion as his justification. Since then, Hull City have played 12 games under Liam Rosenior's successor Tim Volter, if you include pre-season friendlies, failing to win a single one of them, losing friendlies against League One Reading and League Two Doncaster Rovers, an EFL Cup first-round tie against Sheffield Wednesday's second team, and 3 draws followed by 2 defeats in their opening 5 matches of the Championship campaign. It leaves Hull sat 22nd in the Championship table, 3rd from bottom, with only car crash Cardiff City having won fewer points than them. Still, who cares about league placement? We're only 5 games into the season. What about all of that attacking and entertaining football that was promised? Well, yeah, I mean, about that. The Tigers have scored 2 goals in 5 games so far this season. They have taken the joint 3rd fewest shots on target in the Championship this season, they have created the 5th fewest big chances in the division, and they have scored the 2nd fewest goals of any team, trailing only, once again, Cardiff City. Still, it could always be worse. It's not like Liam Rosenior has taken over at a League One team that finished 13th last season and has only lost 1 of his first 4 games in charge. Oh, for You would be well within your rights, therefore, to ask the question, what on earth is going on at Hull City? Well, you're in luck, because through gritted teeth as a Hull City fan, I'm about to tell you. So sit back, relax, and join me on a journey to Kingston upon Hull, the birthplace of Britain's foremost slave abolitionist, yet also the scene of some of the UK's most high-profile recent race riots. The duality of Hull, you might call it, as we take a look at quite possibly the biggest rebuild in the entire EFL this summer, what has gone wrong for the so far not so mighty Tigers at the start of this season, and why this stupid football club is determined to make me look forward to international breaks almost as much as Gareth Bale did in his last couple of seasons at Real Madrid. In my last video about Hull City, in May 2024, I know, these once annual updates will soon turn into monthly ones, I started by talking about how frequently Hull City have had to rebuild their squad over the last 10 years, as a result of several promotions and relegations during that time, combined with a high degree of managerial turnover and an unstable ownership situation. In the 2017-18 season, for example, following relegation from the Premier League, the Tigers lost 9 of their regular starting 11 from the previous season, bringing in a new manager and 12 new senior players to replace them. Meanwhile, in the 2022-23 season, which was new owner Acil Ilıcalı's first full season in charge, 50 new first-team arrivals were brought in during the summer window alone, most of whom had played in Turkey at some stage. Even by that standard, though, the turnover at Hull City this summer has been quite extraordinary. Of the team that started against Plymouth Argyle on the final day of last season, in Liam Rosenior's final game in charge just 4 months ago, only 3 players are still at the club, and only one of them started Hull City's most recent game this season against Sheffield United on Friday night. Out of the 17 players who made the most appearances for the Tigers in the Championship last season, just 4 remain. Of the 68 goals that Hull City scored in the Championship last season, the players responsible for scoring 64 of them have all since departed. Overall, 16 new first-team players have arrived. Steven Alzate, the latest of them, signed as a free agent after the transfer window shut. Meanwhile, 19 first-team players have departed, or 23 if you include returning loanees. Given that Championship teams can have squads of up to 25 players, excluding under-21s, Hull City have therefore signed 2/3 of an entire squad and lost 92% of one in the space of just 4 months. It's a degree of squad turnover that might make Todd Bowley take one look and say, "Whoa, ease up there, lads. I think that might be a bit much." This was a situation, as I said in each of my last 2 Hull City videos, one midway through last season and one at the end of it, which the Tigers created for themselves. Loanees, most notably Tyler Morton, Liam Delap, and Fabio Carvalho in the second half of the season, were all stalwarts last season, none of whom were ever likely to stick around. Jacob Greaves and Jayden Philogene were 2 of the best players in the Championship last season, and probable future England internationals, who were never going to stay unless the club won promotion. And then you had 5 players, including Aaron Connolly and Adama Traore, who were out of contract, none of whom looked particularly likely to sign new deals. A major rebuild was therefore inevitable this summer as a result of Hull City's squad planning since owner Adjunle Lajala arrived in January 2022, but that rebuild was made even bigger by the less inevitable sales of Ozan Tufan, Jean-Michel Seri, and, at least after he was recalled during the summer window, and the Tigers failed to bring in a proven goal scorer at Championship level, also, somewhat surprisingly, Oscar Estepinian. What's more, whereas when Liam Rosenior finished 7th last season, the narrative spun from inside the club was that his sacking was a sign of ambition and impatience on the part of Ilajala to reach the Premier League. As the summer proceeded, with former Hamburg boss Tim Walter appointed as Rosenior's successor, expectations were gradually tempered. Despite the sales of Jacob Greaves and Jayden Philogene for a combined £33 to £36 million, subject to add-ons, Ilajala made it clear that not all of that money would be available to reinvest in the playing squad, owing to the amount of money that had been spent the previous season and concerns relating to Championship profit and sustainability regulations. As per the last set of accounts, Hull City had an operating loss of £20.6 million in the 2022-23 season, meaning that the club lost about £400,000 a week before player sales, up from £7.9 million the previous season. That came as the result of a massive 86% increase in the club's wage bill within the space of 12 months, and a 66% increase in operating expenses overall. Championship clubs are permitted to lose a maximum of £41.5 million over a rolling 3-year monitoring period, up from £39 million recently, with Ilajala stating, quote, "When you look at our squad at the moment, our wages are high plus the money we have paid to clubs. We are on the limit. We are playing chess." End quote. That was over a year ago, in July 2023. In actual fact, although the official accounts haven't yet been published, Hull City will have increased their wage bill and overall expenditure last season, bringing in the likes of Jayden Philogene and Aaron Connolly on significant salaries from Premier League clubs, but it was on loan deals that the Tigers made their greatest investment. By the end of December, Hull City had snuck inside of the playoff places. Buoyed by that start, in the January transfer window, owner Adjunle Lajala and those around him, who he refers to as his brains team, decided to throw the kitchen sink at promotion. Left-back Ruben Benagre and attacking midfielder Scott Twine's loan deals were terminated to make way for Ryan Giles, signed on loan with an obligation to make that move a permanent one from Luton Town in the summer for around £4 million, and Liverpool's Fabio Carvalho, which was seen as a major coup given the interest of Championship rivals Leeds and Southampton. Morton and Delap were retained, meanwhile Turkish international Abdulkadir Ömür arrived for a substantial fee from Trabzonspor. Croatian goalkeeper Ivor Panda was signed from Fortuna Sittard, who Ilajala used to part own. The Championship's all-time record goalscorer Billy Sharp was brought in on a free following a spell with LA Galaxy in the United States. And as well as Giles and Carvalho, Standard Liège's Noah Ohio and Burnley's Anas Zaroury joined the Tigers on loan until the end of the season. All told, Hull City brought in 7 new January arrivals. Summer rebuilds are for amateurs. At the MKM Stadium, we like to overhaul the squad every 6 months. Before I point out why this was not a very good idea, and why Hull City keep doing things that aren't very good ideas, it is worth noting that, until very recently at least, I was in a minority among Hull City fans in being concerned about the competence of our owner's decision-making process, and indeed, there are still many people who have full confidence in him and believe no serious errors of judgment have been made. So I want to present those counter-arguments and steelman that position because certain aspects of it are not entirely without merit, before destroying it like one of those controlled demolitions because most aspects of it have very little merit. The pro-Ilajala all is well, stop being so negative argument goes something a bit like this. In Ilajala's first summer in charge, in 2022, he was wide-eyed and naive, but he learnt from his mistakes with the appointment of Liam Rosenior and more sensible recruitment in 2023. Last season, he sensed an opportunity to sneak up through the playoffs and took a calculated risk to spend heavily in January in order to realise that ambition. It didn't work out, causing the club to sell their most valuable assets, namely Greaves and Philogene, for cut price fees early on in the summer window, before finding it difficult to replace the mass exodus that the club had sanctioned, because they had to wait until the end of the window for certain targets to become available. Given the turnover of players, and the fact that most of them arrived so late on that they had little to no pre-season under new manager Tim Volter, it could be argued that a slow start this season was to be expected, but that particularly the young, high-potential players that Hull City have signed should mean that the squad eventually comes good and starts to pick up results. It all sounds reasonable enough when you lay it out like that, doesn't it? Oh, not quite. For a start, it's not naive to think that signing 14 new first-team players in your first summer window, only a handful of whom had any experience playing in the Championship before, while appointing a manager who had never worked in English football before, had been out of work for over 12 months, and whose last job was 3.5 years managing in Uzbekistan, wasn't just taking a massive risk, it is downright stupid. Secondly, the supposed calculated risk of going hell for leather in the January window was ill-conceived for a number of reasons. By January, Leicester, Leeds, Ipswich and Southampton already had the top 4 places wrapped up and were miles better than every other team in the division. That meant that the automatic promotion places were already miles out of reach. Hull City were as close to the bottom 3 as they were to the top 2 by the end of the January window, as were 2 of the 4 playoff places, and there was little to split the Tigers and 9 other teams in pursuit of the remaining 2 spots. What's more, even if Hull had snuck into the playoffs following their January arrivals, whichever of the top 4 missed out on the automatics were always, quite rightly, going to be the 2 favourites heading into the playoffs. As it happened, Leeds United and Southampton were the 2 who missed out, and, as expected, they overcame Norwich City and West Brom in the playoff semi-finals, who pipped Hull City to a playoff spot, before meeting in the final. It was a calculated risk, therefore, only in the same sense as going all in a game of Texas Hold'em poker post-flop, when all you've got is 10 high card, and there are 2 aces already on the flop, is, technically speaking, a calculated risk, just one calculated with all of the mathematical aptitude of Priti Patel calculating how many COVID tests have been carried out in the UK during the pandemic.
As of 9 a.m. today, there have been 974,000 tests carried out across the UK, excluding Northern Ireland.
Wow, just imagine if they'd included Northern Ireland. To make matters worse, Hull City didn't actually improve following their January transfer window investment. In actual fact, on a points per game basis, they got worse, as Liam Rosenior, somewhat understandably in my view, struggled to integrate 7 new players who all hope to be starting games mid-season. Fabio Carvalho was excellent, and well worth a reported £500,000 loan fee and wages, as a significant upgrade on Scott Twine, and Abdelkader Amr grew into the team following a slow start, albeit without providing any end product, but Ivor Panda, who was very much an Ilajala signing, who was imposed on Liam Rosenior against his will, and Noah Ohio barely got a look in, Billy Sharp looked like an arthritic groundsman who'd accidentally found his way onto the pitch and into a Hull City kit, and Anas Arori, for all of his undoubted talent, having been excellent in Burnley's promotion campaign the previous season, was a bizarre signing who didn't come cheap. Jayden Philogene was the best player in the championship during the first half of the season, both statistically and, in my view, based on the eye test as well, operating off the left flank. Anas Zaroury is also a left winger, who's only ever played 2 games on the right out of 141 career appearances, and I am reliably informed by Burnley supporters that there is a good reason why he has never played there again. Zaroury's arrival, therefore, meant playing the best player in the championship in Philogene out of position, which significantly reduced his output in terms of goals, assists, and overall influence. Meanwhile, Zaroury, who was thrown into the starting 11, having played barely 300 minutes of football for Burnley during the first half of the season, wasn't able to compensate for what Hull City had lost in moving Philogene to the right. In case you think I'm exaggerating, Philogene averaged 0.43 goals per game in his 21 appearances on the left flank last season, compared to just 0.18 goals per game in his 11 games playing off the right. Last season was also a uniquely difficult season in which to win promotion. Every team with parachute payments is at a major advantage these days, but Leicester, Leeds and Southampton were especially strong even by newly relegated team standards. Meanwhile, Ipswich under Kieran McKenna were a force of nature and historically impressive by newly promoted team standards, at least over the last 10 years. The 3 newly promoted Premier League teams, by contrast, Burnley, Sheffield United and Luton Town, all look likely to, and indeed went on to come straight back down, none of whom looked to be as strong as Leicester, Leeds or Southampton. Hull City, therefore, voluntarily overextended themselves in the hope of realising a pipe dream midway through a season where the top 4 were already in unassailable positions, when they had a talented young squad developing organically under Liam Rosenior. And not only didn't it work, with those signings as a whole making them worse, and the club missing out on the playoffs and promotion, it put them in a more precarious financial situation this summer, hindering their ability to compete in a season in which the top end of the championship is undeniably weaker than last season, and promotion for a well-run club would therefore be much more feasible. None of this, it should be noted, not the crazy first summer, the strange Zaroury deal, not even the bizarre January kitchen sink strategy, is me passing judgment with the benefit of hindsight. You can go back, should you wish, which I doubt you would, and you will find me saying all of this either in my previous Hull City videos or on Twitter at the time. One of my biggest criticisms of Adjan Ilajala's ownership since he arrived has been the fact that he hasn't put anyone with any serious experience or competence running a football club, let alone an English club, in any senior executive position. Hands-on chairman and owner Ilajala was briefly a shareholder at Dutch minnows Fortuna Sittard before buying Hull City. Vice chairman Tan Kesler was a strategic planner for the Turkish Football Federation for 9 years before being appointed by Ilajala, one of the most incompetent and underachieving FAs on the planet, and before that he worked in basketball, never for a football club. Meanwhile, performance manager Barry Pardo, whose role Ilajala has likened to that of a director of football — Hull City don't actually have a director of football, a sporting director, or a CEO — is only 34 years old and has only previously worked as a scout, an analyst, and as an assistant manager, never a senior executive. In fact, for most of this summer, while carrying out a bigger rebuild than almost any other club in the entire EFL, Hull City didn't even have a head of recruitment, after the former occupant Lee Darnborough departed for Stoke City and was only replaced at the end of the window by the man that Lee Darnborough had replaced at Stoke, namely Jared Dublin. This is a critique that has aged better than Salma Hayek or Johnny Rotten's 1978 comments about Jimmy Savile, and still hasn't been rectified. But these are mistakes that were easily identifiable to anyone who even follows football, including some idiot that makes YouTube videos about the sport for a living, and shouldn't even have required any particularly capable executives. But hey, let's be unduly generous for a moment. Supposing that we accept the kamikaze first summer, the very badly calculated January risk-taking, and the reckless squad planning that has coloured the entire Ilajala era as forgivable teething problems for an overexcitable, heavily hands-on, and inexperienced owner, that only makes the sacking of Liam Rosenior even more bizarre. If you're going to uproot and overhaul practically your entire first-team squad in the space of a single summer, bringing in a brand new squad with very little championship experience, surely the one thing that you'd want is the security of a tried and tested manager who knows the league, the club, and the surrounding area, has a lot of goodwill already built in with supporters, a proven track record of, at the very least, making teams difficult to beat, and has a really good reputation within the game. Instead, Hull City chose to sacrifice the one element of stability at the club, and indeed, the one person in a position of real authority who has any genuine understanding of the Championship and what it takes to succeed in this league, in order to bring in a new manager to take charge of a brand new team in a new league and in a new country who has a very mixed managerial record and reputation in Germany up to this point. None of this is a criticism of Tim Walter himself. He has inherited an incredibly difficult job, replacing a popular manager who finished 7th last season, and trying to implement a new style of football with only the bare bones of a squad throughout most of pre-season. If Hull City don't win any of their next 4 games before the next international break, I would be surprised if Walter kept his job. But make no mistake, he is a victim of a much broader malaise rather than the cause of the problem. With that being said, it's worth talking a little bit about Tim Walter's tactics and why, so far at least, they haven't worked out. Renowned for his risk-taking, stubbornness, and abrasive attitude in the second Bundesliga in Germany, where Walter twice tried, came close, but ultimately failed to win promotion at Hamburg, before being sacked in his 3rd season, Walter is determined to play out from the back with an almost religious devotion. He likes his centre-backs and full-backs to be incredibly fluid, interchanging and overlapping to create outballs, with his goalkeeper stepping out to act as an extra outfield player in possession. His midfield, well, in possession, he basically doesn't have one. None of Walter's midfielders come deep and show for the ball. Even his deepest midfield are out of possession, and 4 different players have played there already this season, pushes deep into the opposition's half in possession, meaning that the ball out will almost always go wide when Hull City attack, practically never building up through the middle. The idea is that the defenders and the goalkeeper alone ought to be able to beat the press, and once they have played their way out, Walter's team can create overloads in the final third as a result of having so many players push forward. The reality, however, is that Hull City have struggled to play that out ball. They have put a lot of hopeful and, in some cases, downright hopeless balls into the box, and on a number of occasions, the lack of midfield options has led to them losing the ball in their own half, overexposed, and inevitably therefore conceding opportunities and ultimately goals. So far, it has made Hull City incredibly easy to play against. On Friday night, Sheffield United only had 31% possession at the MKM Stadium, but they scored 2 absolute gifts on the counter-attack and never looked like conceding before going 2-0 up. After which, admittedly, the Tigers created 2 big chances, but failed to convert either one of them. After the match, Chris Wilder described Sheffield United's performance as being their worst of the season, despite the 2-0 win, but stated, quote, "It's well documented how they play and they give you a chance, and they gave us chances. I'm just disappointed that when they gave us the chance, we weren't better and more clinical." End quote. That, right there, is the crux of the problem. Hull City are a team that give you chances, and at the opposite end, there are 0 guarantees that 1, they will create many of their own, and 2, and even more importantly in fact, that they will take the ones that they create for themselves. There was a lot of hot air this summer from Chairman Ajin Ilajala and Vice Chairman Tan Kesler about Hull City signing a striker that would impress supporters and make the rest of the division sit up and take note, right up until the end of the window. In the end, supporters and the rest of the championship were left waiting. Kiefer Moore and Brandon Thomas Asante turned down moves to the MKM Stadium in favour of joining Sheffield United and Coventry City. Meanwhile, loan deals for Chelsea's David Washington and David Datro Fofana were left too late on deadline day, and Oscar Estepinian, the only proven championship goalscorer in the Hull City squad, was allowed to join Liga MX side Juarez on the incorrect assumption that a deal for a striker would ultimately be completed. it leaves Hull City with only 2 out-and-out centre-forwards. Chris Bedia, who scored prolifically for Servette in the Swiss Super League, but only played 139 minutes of football and only scored a solitary goal during the second half of last season for Union Berlin, and Mason Burstow, a 21-year-old from Chelsea, who scored just 1 goal in 20 games on loan at Sunderland last season. Bedia looks positive, if incredibly raw, and yet to actually score his first goal for the club, but there is absolutely no one in the current Hull City squad who you would hang your hat on hitting double figures this season, let alone the elusive supposed 20-goal-a-season striker. It is illustrative of 2 problems at Hull City. 1. A failure and lack of planning in terms of recruitment, which owner Ajinul Ajala put down to his involvement at Fenerbahce, where he joined the board in June 2024, working closely with president and friend Ali Koç, telling the Turkish press, quote, "Fenerbahce is in my veins, my priority will be Fenerbahce," end quote, which ought to ring 1 or 2 alarm bells in of itself, and 2, a habit of, at best, overpromising and embellishing, or, if you wanted to be more scathing, you could argue outright lying. Whereas most clubs keep quiet when it comes to transfers until they're done deals, Hull gave practically a running commentary on their interest in Charlie Hughes whenever they were quizzed by the local press, much to Wigan Athletic's surprise and irritation, and in April, Ilajala claimed that he wouldn't consider a bid as low as €30 million for Jadon Philogene, before accepting 3 £18 million or €21 million bids for the England under-21 star. It is a habit that some Hull City fans noticed earlier than others, and some accept as being part and parcel of being owned by an erratic media personality. Yet almost all would now accept that it is likely to become a feature of his ownership, rather than a bug, at least while he is so involved in the day-to-day running of the club. For what it's worth, I agree with Ilajala's initial assessment. Jadon Philogene is the most naturally gifted footballer I've ever seen in a Hull City shirt, other than JJ Okocha, who was about 50 years old when we signed him. He also has the highest ceiling of anyone that I've ever seen in a Hull City shirt, and that includes the likes of Andy Robertson, Harry Maguire, and Jared Bowen. On the ball, Philogene is out of this world. Before his injury, and when he played in his best position, he was the most productive player in the Championship last season, and he has a fantastic work rate, ground coverage, and willingness to defend for a wide man. On his England under-21 debut against Serbia, alongside the likes of Rico Lewis, Noni Madueke, and Cole Palmer, Philogene was the best player on the pitch. And if he doesn't go on to become a regular in England's senior team, something will have gone wrong. With that in mind, young, English, incredible potential, all of which also apply to Jacob Greaves, who was one of the 2 best centre-backs in the Championship last season, the combined £33 million that Hull City received, in my view, is way below market value, and will age very badly as deals from a Hull City perspective. Bizarrely, Ajinul Ajala actually agrees that Hull could have got a lot more money for the pair of them, despite sanctioning their cut price sales, stating, quote, "Look at Jacob Greaves. I could have kept him for 2 more months to sell him for more money. It would have been so easy. Jadon is the same too, but that is not us. And we will not be like this, and in the long term, everybody will see that this kind of approach from us will let us get more players." End quote.
Okay, but that's worse. I mean, you do get how that's worse, right?
The logic, seemingly, is that in being very accommodating to players who want out, other players will view Hull City as a useful stepping stone where they will be allowed to leave with little friction once they've become too good for the club. That's great and all, and no one in their right mind expected Hull City to keep hold of Jacob Greaves, let alone Jadon Philogene this summer, but you can be accommodating and understanding of a player's desires to better themselves while still getting the best deal for yourselves. You could maybe, though I still wouldn't be convinced, argue that selling early and on the cheap could be justified if Hull City had used those funds to reinvest, build up a squad early in the window ahead of pre-season, and sacrifice several £1 million in pursuit of being better prepared for the start of the upcoming campaign. What Ilajala and Hull City actually did, however, is the worst of both worlds. Selling for peanuts, doing next to no early business, and going into the season woefully unprepared for a campaign in the world's richest and most ruthless second tier. So, that's the bad news. The good news is that Jacob Greaves and Jayden Philogene got a full pre-season with their new clubs and look raring to go and hit the ground running at the start of their debut campaigns.
You're still thinking about the bad news, aren't you? There's no good news, David. It's only bad news and irrelevant news. Yeah, that's not a phrase though, is it? I couldn't come out and go, oh, I've got some bad news and some irrelevant news.
The most insane moment of Adrian Ilajala's ownership came on May 15th, 2024, when he called a Q&A with supporters to explain Liam Rosenior's sacking and his plans for the upcoming season. At that Q&A, Ilajala publicly singled out Ryan Alsop, Hull City's #1 for criticism, stating that he should have been dropped for Ivor Panda, the goalkeeper who was signed from Fortuna Sittard, who Ilajala previously part-owned, and who has started this season but wasn't favoured by Liam Rosenior. He called out striker Aaron Connolly, basically calling him overweight and stating that he had expected him to lose weight. And he complained that Liam Rosenior didn't play Dokan Sinek more often, one of Ilajala's expensive signings from the Turkish Super League, despite the fact that he has spent 90% of his Hull City career out injured and did nothing in the remaining 10% when fit. It was a quite bizarre spectacle, representative, I think, of a culture clash between Turkish and English football. In the Turkish Super League, it's not uncommon for owners and chairmen to outright accuse officials, the Football Federation, and broadcasters of bias and corruption, to publicly attack players, either their own or other teams, and to speak openly, and with much hyperbole, on a whole wide range of issues. That is just the norm. In English football, where owners and chairmen tend to be much more detached and reserved, with a lot of owners rarely speaking publicly at all, let alone in such abrasive and sensationalist terms, it makes you look unhinged. There were some Hull City fans at the time who said that they agreed with Ilajala's assessment. Maybe they thought that Alsop deserved to be dropped, Connolly wasn't match fit, or I guess there must have been someone out there, maybe his mum, that Sinek should have played more football, despite being made out of poppadoms and papier-mâché, stuck together using one of those knockoff Pritt stick glues, which are about as adhesive as Teflon, but that is to miss the point. Even if everything that he said were legitimate, an owner throwing their own players under the bus in a Q&A in front of a crowd of people and live stream to thousands more is a very, very bad idea for many, many reasons, most of which should be obvious. Aside from the impact on those players themselves, who, in Alsop's case, was still under contract at the club, they have friends in the dressing room who talk to each other and, 1, think it's shitty what the owner has said about their mates, and 2, wonder whether they might be next. And these types of things are impossible to keep in-house. As someone who works in football and, occasionally, though only ever as a last resort if it absolutely cannot be avoided, has to talk to people, the perception of Hull City within the game, among staff, players, and, perhaps most notably agents, changed dramatically between the end of the 2023-24 season, when the club was considered to be relatively stable, in the ascendancy, and in the safe hands of Liam Rosenior, to one that was considered very unstable, volatile, and in a sea of unknowns given the owner's erratic behaviour, the player exodus, the lack of direction in terms of recruitment, and the sudden absence of the sole stabilising force of Liam Rosenior. That, I have no doubt, along with Ilajala being more preoccupied with his new role at Fenerbahce, played a large part in why Hull City found it so difficult to recruit players this summer, and so much of their urgent transfer business was delayed until the last minute. And it is something that, should Tim Volter fail to see out this season, will make it more difficult for the club to appoint a sought-after replacement. There is enormous goodwill among Hull City supporters towards Adrian Ilajala, primarily because of who he replaced. The Alams, who were about as charming and personable in their communications with supporters as Gordon Ramsay is with struggling restaurateurs on an episode of Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares.
You donkey! You're cooking in a burnt pan, you fucking dick! Donkey! Donkey!
Along with the enormous strides that have been made under his ownership to rebuild the connection between the club and supporters and to fill the stadium, which deserve immense credit. But, and it is a big but, not like that. Just because the former owner openly despised supporters doesn't mean that you can't criticise the current owner, who is hardly a squeaky clean character himself, as I covered in my last Hull City video, for making a litany of schoolboy errors. I always find it bizarre when I see Hull City fans online, in response to any and all criticism, no matter how legitimate, quote tweeting or replying to someone with, "Would you rather go back to the Alams?" as if those were the only two options. You can either have a Turkish crony capitalist who has no ties to the club or surrounding area and only attended his first Hull City game in 2021, already in his 50s, but has very close ties to the kleptocratic Erdogan regime and, purely coincidentally just so happened, to rapidly grow his media empire and net worth following a state crackdown on press and media freedoms following the coup attempt in 2016, who supports Fenerbahce, where he now sits on the board, has displayed all of the tactical and strategic nous of an overexcited 12-year-old playing Football Manager, and refuses to appoint anyone with any knowledge or experience to a senior executive position. Or you get the vindictive father and son duo who do have ties to the region and keep their noses out of most football matters, but have zero interest in football, display open disdain for supporters, and removed all funding for the club when that disdain was reciprocated. What do you mean you want an option C? Not only do you supposedly have to pick one of those two, you have to be happy with that choice, and if you pick the former, as about 95% of Hull City supporters would, I suspect, then you best not dare criticise anything that he ever does. I am in danger of wandering into rant territory here, but this sort of stuff does my head in. This is a tweet that I saw the other day on the Hull City hashtag. I'll give you a second to read it and, I hope, get as vexed at it as I did. I see this sort of stuff all the time now, not just among Hull City fans, and I can't think of a better way to describe it than the sort of cucked mentality of English football fans, or maybe just spineless and submissive would be a less controversial way of putting it than cucked. To describe yourself, a football fan, as nothing more than a customer, and to liken your club, with all of the history, family ties, and emotional attachment that is most likely wrapped up in that, to a local supermarket is one thing, but it is the way in which a lot of English football fans, jaded by decades of uber financialisation, in a league pyramid where getting lucky with your owners is the only way for anyone outside of the rich six to become upwardly mobile, welcome their powerlessness and the content that they are openly held in either as being uncontroversial or at the very least inevitable that I find so jarring. In the Bundesliga, when the league entertained the idea of selling off a portion of their media rights to external investors, almost every club's fans staged such vociferous and disruptive protests that the proposals were halted and overturned. In English football, when Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund acquires one of the nation's biggest and best supported clubs, their own fans sellotape tea towels to their heads and start singing the praises of a murderous theocratic dictatorship, with the small pocket of regular protesters smeared as being Sunderland supporters. I mean, why else would they object to being owned by the Saudi state? I digress somewhat, but this is a pet peeve of mine. You can criticise the owners of your football clubs. In fact, invariably you're right to, because the vast majority of them are deeply compromised people, a great many of them are utterly abhorrent, and some of them are, quite literally, among the worst people in the world. I like to end my videos on a positive note because, as many of you will know, I'm just a pretty happy-go-lucky kind of guy. I can't help it, alright? It's just in my nature. For all of the errors, Hull City have signed some promising young players this summer. Charlie Hughes, who just underwent surgery on his appendix, Cody Dramé and Abu Kamara probably foremost among them, along with a whole raft of unknown quantities, at least one or two of whom, surely, if by the law of averages if nothing else, must turn out to be half decent, and it is, as bad as it has been, still very early days. Personally, I don't hold Tim Volter accountable for Hull City's miserable start to the season. He has inherited a set of circumstances that any manager would have found challenging. But I do doubt whether he has the full confidence of the dressing room, and unless he can turn that around in the next couple of weeks, it will be extremely difficult for his position to remain tenable. For Illa, given the controversial sacking of Rosenior, sacking Volter, who was so explicitly his man owing to his style of play, which hasn't worked out, would be a tacit admission of a serious error of judgment and tantamount to a humiliation. Despite the significant departures, only Burnley and Leeds United have spent more on new signings than Hull City in the Championship this season, almost £25 million, and even with the sales of Tufan, Seri, Greaves and Philogene, the Tigers most likely still have a top-half wage bill. To finish outside of the top half, therefore, would be a significant failure. At the end of last season, after finishing 7th, up from 15th the previous season, most Hull City fans would have expected to finish in the top 6 this season, with a possible challenge for the automatic places. History is now being rewritten, following Liam Rosenior's dismissal, that mid-table mediocrity, or even mere survival, would be a success this season, providing a platform for the club to build on under, hopefully, less chaotic circumstances next season. That's nonsense. Anything below 7th is not just a failure, given the context and the expectations that have been set, but a failure entirely of the club's own making. Sorry. That was supposed to be me ending on a positive note. I did my best. As with every Hull City video on this channel, and most videos if we're honest, there was a whole lot more that I had planned to talk about, including conversations with people at the club, the strange situation surrounding Evil Panda's signing, and the ultimately collapsed deal to bring Liam Cooper back to the club, and a whole lot more detail about the current complexion of the squad, and new signings like Mohamed Baloumi, Abu Kamara, Liam Miller, Casey Palmer, Gustavo Puerta, and Steven Alzate, the ridiculous bloated goalkeeping options at the club, and the disquiet that has caused, one summer arrival, Oscar Zambrano, being on the brink of a suspension for a failed doping test, with some reports coming out of South America suggesting that he could be banned for up to 2 years. It's never dull in Hull. But hey, I guess that'll just have to wait for next time, which will probably be what? About 3 weeks? Anyway, thank you all very much as ever for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed my pain, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course, it goes without saying, make sure that you're subscribed and have notifications turned on, not just for this channel, HITC Sevens, but also my second channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now, along with a couple of videos, including my last Hull City one, which you, might fancy watching after this. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads via the username @HITC Sevens on all three, should you wish to do so, and all of those links plus a whole lot more should be down in the video description below. Cheers.